A wise man once said, "All great change in America begins at the dinner table." Think about it. When the American farmer sets the table, he puts out plates to feed himself and about 100 of his closest friends and neighbors 3 times a day. It didn't come easy. It took strong men and women willing to change to become the most bountiful nation in the world. What started with a draft horse and a plow that covered 4 to 5 acres in a day has turned to tractors covering 18 acres an hour. We sure have come a long way, but we can't stop growing and changing. That dinner table is getting larger. The world's population is expected to grow from 7 to 9 billion people by 2050. Over the next 40 years, farmers will have to produce as much food and fiber as they did in the last 500 years. Just to keep up. More mouths to feed, rising cost, challenging weather, and a shrinking land base. How do we meet the needs of tomorrow, maintain our precious soil and water resources, and grow our bottom line all at the same time? Sustainability and profitability. It's a complex balancing act, but by achieving one, we also expect the other. How? Doing more the same hasn't worked. Get up earlier, work the ground more, leave less residue, rebuild the terraces, and watch water or wind erode the soil you depend on. Financial stability and sustainability can only come with change. We can't look for better yields, healthier soils, fewer man-hours, less erosion, and more profit without change. Change is what we have to do. Take an uncomfortable step. Take a step down a new road. Change. Each grower may start at a different point and travel at a different speed, but there are 10 common signposts to sustainable soil health and prosperity along the way. If we are willing to honestly look at what we are doing now, consider alternatives, ask questions, adopt and implement solutions, and stick to it through the rough ride, we'll make it. It starts with number 1. Recognizing the problem. Land. It is the most precious resource a farmer has. How many times have you heard someone say they're not making any more of it, but healthy soils are under attack from erosion? Sometimes it's wind and sometimes it's water.
The 50s were kind of tough down in our area, and there was a lot of dry weather and a lot of dust storms and that sort of thing. And at that time, virtually everyone in the community used moldboard plows, primarily wheat country. The scenario was the plow would be the first thing that you would till the ground with, and then a spring tooth or light cultivation of some time, and maybe 3, 4, 5 times of that during the summer. So by the time seeding time came around, everything was pretty powdery and vulnerable to both wind and water erosion at that point.
We farm in an area that's a real high clay soil. It's a red clay soil, not particularly vulnerable to wind erosion, but very vulnerable to water erosion. And also, if you work that ground a little too wet, it pulls up tremendously big clods and chunks that we spent the rest of the summer working back down to something we could make for a seed bed.
Over the years, wind and water erosion have taken their toll on soil health, and traditional farming practices deepen the negative effects.
I remember Dad telling me that, I've always thought that you usually get paid for your tillage one way or the other. What was true in his generation may not be true in my generation at all.
What was good for our grandfathers may not be good for us. Now we know that tillage disturbs the soil structure and makes it more vulnerable to erosion. It also reduces crop residues that protect the soil from wind and water erosion and holds moisture. Each time the ground is worked, valuable moisture is released into the air. Tillage requires more fuel, more labor, and more equipment hours.
As I watched my dad and talked to him, I felt like that it would sure be nice if you didn't have to come out here and turn that soil upside down, working that soil back down to make a seed bed.
We were very conventional. My grandparents terraced, and I farmed the way that the manual indicated would be the proper way. And I really couldn't make up the decision to go completely no-till. But at one of the meetings where they had the rainfall simulator, And when he flipped over the tray with the plowed ground and it was completely dry, I just instantly made up my mind that that was the proper way that we should be farming some of this ground.
I remember having to plow the ditches in before we could plow across them. And my understanding of what needed to be done was build terraces and contour farm. But I was looking for ways to better that situation. The big realization when you go into the banker and you can't pay your notes, then you know from an economic standpoint that's not working.
There must be a better way. As we begin to realize the need for change, it's time to start asking questions of other farmers, crop specialists, suppliers, and exploring our own willingness to try new tools. To get answers, growers can attend meetings on tillage, cover crops, and residues. Develop a pool of knowledge for new tools and technologies that reduce tillage, and seek out support for open-minded solutions. Which leads us to number 2, asking questions.
Now that I've had children, and some of the questions they ask me are questions I ask some of my neighbors. Different equipment they bought, different things they did, directions they worked the ground.
So I wasn't asking questions of others in my area. There weren't people to ask questions of because it was and still remains predominantly tillage applications. But it did get some exposure through going to no-till on the plains and the summer tour to South Dakota. That's where I started to ask questions.
It wasn't so much why are you doing what you were doing, but why can't you do it this way? And it was more looking for the next step, the next better way. The mindset was that there should always be a better way, and that it's our job to kind of look for that.
Even when we start to get answers, change is hard. With information, the need to change becomes clear. Number 3, formulating the answer. Someone once said, a pessimist complains about the wind. An optimist expects it to change. A realist adjusts his sails. As we come to the answers, we make adjustments based on an understanding of the problem.
Probably the most important thing that I have been made aware of is the idea that I don't know everything. So the idea that we can always improve is something that was necessary for me to be able to learn. It's pretty hard to teach someone that already knows the answers.
Because each grower will start in a different place and go at a different speed, he will also stop at different solutions along the way. We need to formulate our own answers based on location, soil type, and needs. We adjust farming practices based on answers to the questions. How can I reduce tillage to improve my soil health? How can I increase my crop residue and new crop protection? What is the best crop rotation for my soil and location? Should I plant a cover or companion crop? Your answers will be unique to your needs, and your direction should be selected and supported by information, experts, and experienced growers. The underlying goals remain sustainability and profitability. Which leads us to number 4, accepting the truth. The truth is, change is difficult. It takes what we know and makes it different. It's hard, it takes time, but to continually to do the wrong thing efficiently is not the answer.
It certainly wasn't an overnight thing, and when you have things drilled into you for all your childhood that this is the way you do it, and this is the way you are successful, just to move planting date by a couple of weeks on wheat, for example, took me several years, probably close to a decade, to really get comfortable with the idea. I didn't just go no-till overnight. I tried and worked that direction and would have some failures and would fall off the wagon and get the tillage tools out, and always felt kind of stupid once I finished tilling a field that hadn't been tilled for a couple of 3 years, and felt like I'd thrown away some effort. We had a lot of failures with no-till, and it took us a while to realize why the failures occurred. A good share of those were caused by inadequacy of planting equipment, being able to deal with the higher residues. We have to be able to plant through about anything in terms of residues. And it took the industry a while to develop machines that would function in those levels of residue. It didn't happen overnight.
Change takes us from a passive to an active role. It can be exciting and renew our love of the land, engage us, and lead to significant benefits. Sustainable practices lead to healthy soil that decreases soil erosion, increase organic content, promotes growth of earthworms and microbes, and helps retain moisture. Those who adopt the right new tools and techniques, ones that preserve productivity and make economic sense, will survive and pass productive land to the next generation.
I think the first year or two, sure. There was more than one time I wondered, boy, do I know what I'm doing? Is this the right place to be or the right way to go? But after about 4 or 5 years, that question never come to mind again.
When we finally accept the truth, we realize we are part of a larger group of like-minded growers. Which brings us to number 5, connecting with others. There are a lot of resources out there.
It was almost from the very start, there were three of us that would call each other, what rate of the chemical are you using? What planting, how many seeds per acre are you dropping? And the group of people who share information got larger and larger and larger as time went on, as more and more people started to adopt the practice.
I've heard it said you can't be an expert unless you're 50 miles from home. And around our area, there aren't too many people really doing what we are doing 15 years ago when we started.
I think it's very important that we as producers share. It's certainly been important to me that there were people ahead of me that were willing to share their experiences.
Well, there weren't too many books written on it or articles, and it was a lot speedier, and field trips, you could go see results. Those meetings, looking back, that was like a little college education on the fly.
Most growers are willing to share successes and failures. Number 6, adopt the main principles. First, avoid excessive tillage. Reducing tillage minimizes the loss of organic matter and protects the soil surface with plant residue. Tillage can break up soil structure, speed the decomposition and loss of organic matter, increase the threat of erosion, destroy the habitat of helpful organisms, and cause compaction.
Biggest thing we've done for soil health is eliminate tillage. When we first went into no-till, I think you could have taken a shovel out in our fields and dug all afternoon and not found an earthworm. You just didn't see them. And it was about at the 4th year you started seeing a few, and then on through the 5th, 6th, 7th, and we're in about the 10th, 11th year now. And when we're back checking seed placement when we're planting in the spring, the earthworms are quite frequently up fairly high, moisture conditions are good. We'll be cutting earthworms into with the discs that place the seed. And the other thing we noticed is that it takes a really serious rainstorm to pond water on our fields now, whereas back in the tillage days it would seal over and you'd have little puddles of water behind the terraces quite frequently. Now you just don't see that very often at all.
The second principle is keep the ground covered. Bare soil is susceptible to wind and water erosion and to drying and crusting. Ground cover protects the soil, provides habitats for larger organisms such as insects and earthworms, and can improve water availability.
We have found out on our red clay soils that no-till without residue is not a very workable situation. You just almost have to have some ground cover.
Third, diversifying cropping systems. Diversity is beneficial for several reasons. Each plant contributes a unique root structure and type of residue to the soil. A diversity of soil organisms can help control pest populations, and a diversity of cultural practices can reduce weed and disease pressures.
In the process of better understanding what I was doing, I have taken advantage of using diversity and intensity to establish my rotation.
The biggest thing that we started doing is starting to do crop rotations and planting a double crop behind wheat. Then we had another plant of a different species, using water at different times. Once we got into a rotation where we could use broadleafs and grasses at various times of the year, keep something growing there. It's 365 if you want. That's the ultimate goal.
Principle number 4 is maintain living roots. Maintaining a growing crop with living roots provides additional organized matter as well as cover and food for soil organisms.
So the living roots, we try to sequence our growing crops as tightly as we can, and indeed, if things work well, if it rains, we will have only 1 and 2 week periods between the harvest of one crop and the planting of the next. Sometimes the planter's in the field when the combine is.
The principles to develop healthy, sustainable soil don't change. Reduce tillage. Keep ground covered. Diversify cropping systems. Maintain living roots. How we implement them is up to us. Implementing the ideas is number 7. Implementing the principles for healthy soils is not a minor tweak in farming practices. It's a major one.
The ground cover and the soil cover has been probably the key to making no-till work for us.
And several times we planted feed and just let it grow up 6-7 feet tall and fall down, and all the neighbors have asked, well, what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with that? And then the next spring when got ready to plant milo or something, there's just moisture right there. So that was really noticeable.
We saw thatches start to develop, and I was actually starting to get concerned about we're not going to be able to plant through this stuff. And then as the soil more or less came alive and we started having more organisms that were living off of that thatch, now I still have trouble growing enough residue to keep things covered. It just amazes me how fast the residue goes away now, and we do no tillage whatsoever.
In the beginning, I didn't realize the value, but after I've witnessed the incredible support that each of the different crops in the cover crop provide each other, it's night and day.
I think once we understood what we needed to do and we made up our mind that that's what we wanted to do, I think moving forward was pretty easy. You have to think 2 or 3 years down the road, what do I want in this field, or what kind of crops do I think I want to grow? And that's for various reasons, not only the herbicides you put on, but maybe the crops that you plant and how one crop fits behind another. The no-till system is as much a state of mind as it is a farming practice.
It takes vision and commitment to see it through, to adapt to your particular soils, water supplies, and labor. The first to break with tradition are often challenged, which means number 8, correcting mistakes. During those first few years, we learn patience. We make mistakes and adapt our practices as we learn.
In any form of agriculture, it's not a pure science. We make judgments that end up being successful sometimes, and sometimes they're considered mistakes.
Just as any new idea takes time to get used to, conservation practices take time to get right.
Mistakes are incredible learning experiences. Thank goodness we have the opportunity to make them and survive many of them. There are mistakes that are made in the fields, equipment failures, overlaps, different seed mixes that occur. And from each one of those, if you're observant, each can be a good learning experience.
If we keep doing the same thing, we will get the same result. If we want change, we have to try. There will be setbacks and failures, but we learn from them, and we get to celebrate the successes that follow. Step 9, realizing the benefits. The benefits reveal themselves both quickly and slowly.
I don't think there's any question that erosion has gone down greatly. Now it's not eliminated totally, but you can look at those few events, intense events that do run water out of the terraces and down the waterways. The water's much, much clearer, much lower sediment load. We've eliminated big proportion of water erosion. and at least as big a proportion of wind erosion. It is much more trafficable. You can get on it with a piece of machinery much more rapidly after a rainstorm than you could back in the tillage days. I actually think it's easier to run a farm in a no-till scenario than it is in a tilled scenario. You spend much less time actually out in the field. We spray, we plant, and we harvest. Those are the three things we do now. If you look at the energy budgets for the types of things we do now, we're growing crops on a fraction. I'm going to estimate maybe about a third of the energy.
Some of the signs that we observed in soil health development in the beginning was the incredible root development under some of the small grain crops. Brace root structures, corn, just were almost excessive as far as water retention, the ability to grow 2 crops in 1 year.
When thinking about how my quality of life has changed, probably from 2 standpoints. A year ago in the summer when my neighbors were plowing, I was in the Rockies climbing mountains. And this year when my neighbors were starting to plow, I was in Kansas City going to a baseball game. In addition to that, I was having considerable amount of heart problems 10 years ago. And the stress from my farming operation has lessened considerably. The feeling that I get going out in a growing crop in the summertime when it's 10 degrees cooler in that field than it is in my neighbor's field, that's a pretty good feeling.
And best of all, increased profitability.
We are raising crops and yields now that we never could have before. Probably the second is soil savings. Our soil is much better than it was. As far as quality of life, it's about 180 degrees to what we used to be, 20 years ago. We spent the whole summer, sitting on a tractor, and we farmed half the acres than we do now. We've probably doubled our farm size in the last 10 years because people come to us and ask us, will you farm my ground the way you're doing yours?
Our gross revenue has more than doubled. By hiring all the operations done, we're much more timely. We can do things that we used to spend months, almost months to complete. Overall, it's just hard to find something negative to say about this type of system.
Also, a really good feeling to be walking down an old dirt road in the evening and hear the quail whistling out in the middle of my cornfield that I'm walking by. And 20 years ago, that didn't happen. It's been a wonderful feeling to hear one of my landlords who lived in the middle of a field, and for him to tell me that he thought I was crazy when I started. And now, he said, I wouldn't have you farm any other way.
Change, it's inevitable, especially in agriculture. But with courage, a little help from our friends, and a stick-to-it attitude, it will be worth it. To review, Step 1, recognizing the problem. Step 2, asking questions. Step 3, formulating the answer. Step 4, accepting the truth. Step 5, connecting with others. Step 6, adopting the principles. Step 7, implementing the ideas. Step 8, correcting the mistakes. Step 9, realizing the benefits. Now it's our turn to share what we've learned about sustainable agriculture with others. That's number 10, sharing with others. The more you share, the more you learn. Your neighbors may need a little encouragement and information.
Well, after one observes firsthand the benefits that this type of system, the rewards that it can generate, It's a pleasure to share those with others if they're interested. I have neighbors that look over the fence and see what I'm doing, and some of them wonder why we don't spend more time in the field. And I have some neighbors that have migrated, and they're giving it a try.
I don't think this new approach to farming and agriculture would be going anywhere without the individuals who have been pioneers being willing to share their knowledge. I feel a responsibility to help others in this process.
Certainly, I feel I've got an obligation to pass on. But again, it's more of a thought process and more of a problem-solving process than it is knowing the answer right now, because the answer on my land may not quite be the same as what's appropriate for somebody else's. But it's kind of a thought process and a thinking about the biological system and the plants and what they really need. They've got to have the water, they've got to have the sunlight, they've got to have nutrition. And you try to provide those things with as little disturbance to the soil as you can. And that's just kind of a philosophical thing I think we need to kind of try to pass along when we have an opportunity.
But I said, I'm having so much fun. I don't want to quit. I've never had more fun. I've never made more money. Never raised more crops in my life than I have the last 5 or 6 or 7 years. Maybe my kids, the next generation, can benefit from what we've learned and what we've done. And you never know it all. There's always something to learn.
10 simple ways to go down a not-so-simple road to help us to learn a better way to raise the food to fill the plates of America and the world. Change isn't easy. Others will need to make hard decisions and be ready for mistakes. They will question what they've done just as we have. You can share possible solutions, introduce them to others who have embraced conservation practices. Show them the benefits you have harvested from change. It will come back to you. The future depends on it. If you're anything like me, farming is in your blood. Farmers are more than growers or laborers. They are scientists, financiers, inventors, mechanics, engineers, and visionaries. They are stewards of tomorrow. If we care for the land, it will care for us. Soil health and sustainable practices that increase profitability can make the difference as we prepare for the future. It won't happen without us.
And it's been my observation that if you do those things, if you take care of the land, the economics are going to work out. Now, that doesn't mean you just go into it blind and you just try. You run a budget, but if it's right for the land, it's probably going to be right for your pocketbook. And maximizing the use of that water, minimizing the loss of soil, and trying to improve the farm and leave it better for the next generation than it was when you found it. If you do all those things, the economics are probably going to work out.
We have to take a few steps to have both sustainable, healthy soil and a prosperous living. 10 steps to change can make all the difference. The wise man was right. All great change in America begins at the dinner table. The land is our table, and we invite the world to feast at our bounty.